Thank you for joining us for this community conversation on Native Voices. I'm WRFA Public Affairs Director, Julia Ciesla-Hanley. We start this show by recognizing that we are broadcasting from Onondaga homelands whose ancestors have lived here since time immemorial. The Onondagas, commonly known as the Seneca Nation, have encountered New York State's and the United States government's genocidal, ethnic cleansing, and forced removal practices through modern times that have resulted in this land being occupied without their consent. We acknowledge that this land will always be the homelands of the Onondagas. We stand in solidarity as allies in our collective efforts to address ongoing colonization and oppression. As you may have noticed, we have started this program differently than past community conversations. Here at the Reg Lene Center for the Arts, we do not have currently a land acknowledgement statement. Given the topic of the conversation we are having tonight, we felt it was appropriate to include this as part of the process of learning about Indigenous peoples and the contemporary issues affecting all of us, as well as a way to express our desire to begin a journey of understanding. While we do not have an in-person audience at this event, our audience watching online is invited to submit questions for our panel using the comments section on Facebook and YouTube. If time allows, I will then ask these questions. We do ask you to keep your questions brief. Also, this program is made possible through funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting's American Rescue Plan Act Stabilization Grant Fund. And we'll start now with introducing you to our panel of guests. We have Kaycee Colburn, who is from Wolf Clan of Seneca Nation. She is also a resident artist with Jamestown Community College through the Creatives Rebuild New York Grant Program. Welcome tonight.
Thank you for having me.
And we also have then to my immediate right, Justin Schapp, who is with Deer Clan of the Seneca Nation, and he is also a community activist and formerly Chief of Staff for the Seneca Nation and an adjunct professor at St. Bonaventure. So thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Julia. Yeah.
So we're going to go and get right into this because as we were talking before the program, there's so much we could talk about tonight. And our first question, and we'll start with Kaycee on this, is what is the history of the Seneca Nation in this area?
The Seneca Nation has been in this area for hundreds of years. Primarily, we're in the central and western areas of New York State, so like the Genesee area and the Finger Lakes. So we've been here trading, we've been here living and just being for hundreds of years.
Mm-hmm. And Justin, do you have anything to expand on the history of the Seneca people?
Sure. Well, I think sometimes I moonlight as a junior historian, and so forgive me if I go a little too far deep, but I rely on good friends of mine like Robert Dean, who's an archaeologist, who's looked at, who are the people that used to live here? Who are the people that used to enjoy this space? And so when he looked at areas south here into Erie, he saw, as long as thousands of years ago, where there's specific longhouses, middens, clay pottery, the stuff that kind of identify indigenous people as Haudenosaunee people based on their cultural attributes, that those people were enjoying living here and had multiple settlement patterns in this region. So when we say that we're talking about Seneca people kind of living here and enjoying it, this is kind of a space that was also shared among lots of other different people. Of course, the Erie and the Neutrals came down into these spaces, and then all along the Great Lakes. So Lake Erie is an amazing place for transport, for commerce, and the Senecas were arguably one of the more active people in gathering things from other places and trading and enjoying their company, and most of them spoke similar languages as well, even though there were probably dialectical changes. Like we're going to talk. Hopefully, we'll talk about that today. Some language, but when we talk about the specific history of this area, we can't forget that there is a time where Senecas are no longer. They're told they're no longer allowed to be here, and that's part of the story as well. Right. And we want to kind of change that narrative and have people start to understand that this is a Seneca space. It always will be. It's important for us to understand it that way, and that we don't have to be just confined to a reservation. This isn't 1950. This isn't 1930. We're now living in a more hopefully a more enlightened time, where history can instruct us about, the beauties of our past, but hopefully that past will help us build a better future. And so that's why I see with that question, it leads me to how do we understand ourselves today, all people today, and then connect that to the people of the past and really see how these things kind of got built up, and who was kind of left out of that equation. And so is that good? Is that
I think that's good. And I think and part of it is that maybe people forget that when you said thousands of years that people have been in North America, well, and on these continents here, well before anyone sailed across the Atlantic.
Yeah, so the archaeological record is pretty clear that Native peoples here came on a coastal migration path, and they reached here about anywhere from 33,000 years before present, which is important because it gives a lot longer longer view of people's interactions, and then all the different varieties of people that are here, the different language variations. It's absolutely amazing. Even among our own people, we have language dialect changes from people from Ohio speak different than from, say, Tonawanda or even Cattaraugus. We jostle among each other and chide with each other on different dialects and how we should really pronounce these things. So.
Right. And I think beforehand I was making sure that I was pronouncing Onondaga correctly, and then you were talking about how there are different pronunciations of that depending where maybe someone is from.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and Kaycee, you're nodding your head and you say, and so you've encountered that as well.
Yeah, so it's been kind of interesting as I'm trying to relearn the language, and my mom, growing up, she would say a few words here and there, and so I got to know some things, like gaji, which is come here, and these are commands that she would yell at us, it's time to eat, type of stuff, and
Sadakonione.
yeah, and so when I would go back, when I was working at the museum and I was talking about it, the one lady, she said, well, that's Arlene words. And I was like, Arlene, but that's my mom's cousin, and they grew up in the same time. So I kind of got to understand that while the words sound differently now, it's because the ones that I'm learning or have learned are from a different time when it was spoken differently. So.
With languages, how they change they can change. I guess all languages do change, and it's interesting to hear where you can have a very distinct, this is how it was said, this is how it is said now, and those differences. So I want to move on to the next question just so that we can get through everything too. And Justin, I will start with you for this one. So what would you say is the biggest issue or challenge facing the community right now, your community?
So we're multifaceted, and it's hard to say there's just one singular issue. And I think we kind of touched on it with language. So I'll kind of start there because language kind of informs our philosophies, kind of who we are, and it has been under threat for a long time. And so our language. Right now, among the Seneca Nation, specifically Cattaraugus and Allegheny, and I think there's 9 fluent speakers left, which is drastically different from when I was a youth, where there was over 100, and now it's down to about 50 active adult language learners. Just the adults, they include a lot of the young youth in that learning space. So one of the critical areas is language, dealing with and struggling with and conceptualizing a Seneca future where language is, we don't have a first-person speaker, and trying to create first speaker youth has been a specific challenge, and I think we've risen to that challenge. And I also struggle, learning language. I've been learning it my whole life, and so my goals are to continue to learn it and apply it. The other things are clearly we struggle with poverty. We struggle with the social woes of poverty. On the territories, we struggle with substance abuse. We went from alcoholism as being the primary social devastator on our communities. Now it's turned into heroin use, fentanyl, and the tragedies in our communities just continue to pile because of those heavy interactions, and it's affecting Jamestown too. So we're in this same space, and we also have. It's also an area of conflict. I call our territories conflict zones, because we're not just because of there's clearly not like physical conflict there, but there's these spaces were constructed to confine. These spaces were constructed to ensure that Native peoples did not achieve success. They were constructed to ensure that natural resources and wealth creation were denied in our communities, and that's a historical act that's never really been addressed effectively. I mean, we talk about it, we say sovereignty, we say we're kind of acknowledging indigenous peoples' ability to determine their own futures, without really addressing things like natural resources, access, how land displacement really affects whole community psyche, and then we look at the symptoms and we try to treat those symptoms of that by either throwing capital resources at it, or healthcare, or platitudes, but the underlying issues are the communities that are essentially the community, the people who live on territory and live off territory, are all in the same kind of space where if we don't address the ability for them to build their identities either through culture, language, or philosophical connections, then the process that was developed in the late 1800s, the assimilation process that was kind of fostered, is going to have a continued effect of erasure. And that's why we talk about how do we look at large macro issues like historical genocides and ethnic cleansing practices, we've gone through at least 6 forced removals and ethnic cleansing practices, specifically the Seneca people have, and we've kind of forgotten a lot of that. And one of the ways that we tried not to forget is through things like roast corn soup, right? This kind of food where you're actually taking corn and you're kind of burning it. Well, a lot of people forget that the origins of that is from a time where that's all we had to eat because our crops were burned. It's from the Sullivan-Clinton campaigns. It's from when that's all we could scrounge up was going finding the burned corn, and we were able to make soup out of it. And so it's a story of survival, but we use that today and we share it with people. And we've kind of forgotten those removal periods and those times where struggle was real, and how did we overcome it to get to where we are today. And also, I just want to be absolutely clear. When we talk about, most people look at the Seneca Nation or the Seneca people and they say, oh, well, they have casinos, or they have like a semblance of kind of wealth. And they often don't understand that we hold all those things in common, that we don't have things, we're not holding those things individually.
Right.
And so when you look at, say that, you're trying to provide an entire community based on one kind of very vulnerable economic model. And so that, once you build that up and you start providing services with it, when those services get under threat, it puts the whole community into a state of stress, and it puts them all into this vulnerable state of insecurity, and it plays on their psyches, and we have to develop these new coping mechanisms, and we're going to have to develop like new ways of dealing with it, the new roast corn soup, right? So we look for that. How are we developing new roast corn soup? It's a long answer.
No,
it's crazy big how
it's-
much it's affecting us.
Yeah, I think, we talk about generational trauma, and this is beyond generational trauma that is, carried over from hundreds and hundreds of years.
Sure.
In terms of how it affects, and between the assimilation, and now you talked about how there's only, you said 50 adult learners or 50 people who are currently still fluent in the language. Sorry,
They're active learners.
the active learners, and I think how language is culture, and so I'm feeling a lot of things myself, just thinking about how difficult that is. And it's like, think about, well, you take one, things that we can relate to. You mentioned the, with the fentanyl and everything. That, we're dealing with that here. And you're like, well, that's one part. And it's like, and then there's these other things that compound and other issues that are on top of that.
Yeah, I'm a grandchild of Kinzu, so my family was removed in the Kinzu era, and learning about it, I worked of course I knew about it my whole life, and then when I turned 18, my grandma gave me the briefcase of DeForest, her brother, who was the secretary of the Seneca Nation, the clerk of the Seneca Nation at the time, and he had collected all this data and all this stuff for the burials, and she gave me his briefcase, and it was powerful, and I think it sent me on a trajectory of, hey, I'm there's something bigger here that we have to work on, and because that's what he did, and so my grandma was kind of telling me, hey, you need to follow this path, and I've tried to do that as best I can, with all the fun included. I remember Dee as being a very fun guy, but that briefcase was used to hold the documents for the removal of all the burials, and he took that very seriously, and we're not able to enjoy that space anymore because it's now underwater. It's another recent forced removal,
Right.
Forced relocation, and
Less than 70 years ago, less than 60.
yeah,
Maybe?
I think I'm a young man still. So.
Yeah, I was trying to remember exactly what the year standpoint. I don't
Yeah,
remember.
1964.
Kinzu was 65.
65.
So my mom was 10 years old at that time.
So yeah, so you can talk about it's your parents, and that it's that recent,
Yeah.
and people think that this is something that happened way in the past. It's this recent. So to go to you, Kaycee, in terms of biggest challenges or biggest issues you think are facing the Seneca Nation.
Well, I think it kind of goes along with what we were just talking about. It really comes down to education. The public schools here have failed in that regard, and I know that's kind of harsh, but they just have. When I was in 4th grade, I tried to correct my teacher and tell her that we didn't live in teepees here, and she insisted that we did, and that I was a child and I wouldn't know. And even my mom would come into the schools and stuff and showcase some of our oral stories and stuff, like how the chipmunk got her stripes and everything. But yeah, I still didn't have a say, as a child, that hey, no, that is not how things were. And even very recently, my little sister Sam, she was in the high school. She was in 10th grade, and a student approached her and said, there's no way that you can be Native American because they don't exist. We went extinct, is what they believed. The teachers around her did not correct that. And so there's a very real reality, I guess, just with how unrepresented we are in the school system. And then when we do have the mascots and stuff like that that are not a good thing in any sort of way, it furthers that issue.
Yeah, erasure is real, and visibility is devastating to young minds. So.
To go with that, I would call it a companion question, is what do you feel is most misunderstood about your community? And I think, Kaycee, you've mentioned a few things just from your own personal experience and your family's experience. But are there any other things that you feel are misunderstood about the Seneca Nation or about the people?
I think who we are, what we are, and that we are here. I think I look at people like Caroline Parker, who was in the 1800s. She was really like big about showcasing, okay, this is what a Native American woman looks like. And we don't necessarily get that opportunity anymore. A lot of people think we look like Pocahontas or other, Western movie Indians, and that's not true. And when you look at our regalia and the way we dress, like for like powwow and for ceremonies, that is the way that we have been dressing since like the 1200s. And so I'm not really sure why everything really got kind of clumped into this one category of what a Native American looks like. But that's not what we look like.
Justin, same question for you. What do you feel is most misunderstood about the Seneca Nation or its people?
Well, there's just a lot to unpack. I've just been around the country, and you're exactly right when you talk about actual identity misrepresentation and the stereotypes and how you get lumped into one kind of phenotypical look. The Plains headdress, or you have to wear feathers or something. I think arguably one of the most misunderstood is we go to these spaces and we're asked to be something, some object, some identity thing, something for display still, something for, and it's almost like the parts where we're should be spending more time listening to history, reading about the positions, and even ourselves, we do this internally, looking at how did our ancestors think, act, feel, and trying to connect with that. And but far too often we're relegated to cultural displays and the showy things, which are great. Don't get me wrong. I'm a huge fan and love powwows and singing and socials, and I support all of that. But somehow our philosophies, our ways of thinking, our contributions to the world. And I'll give you an example. We're trying to work, and I've been fortunate to work with a lot of really cool people. But one of our most wonderful things was a guy named John Mohawk who started, and his name was Corn Tassel, and he started a white corn project when I was a youngster. And at the time, I didn't even know, we kind of went around white corn, but we ate sweet corn, right? We were like, oh, we love sweet corn, and corn's corn, right? And then he was like, no, you should be celebrating white corn. And so he started this thing, we started growing white corn, and at first I was like, white corn's kind of not as good as sweet corn, and I was a kid, so I was just being truthful. But then when people started talking about white corn and what it means to us and how it's attached to our identity, and it's also its nutritional value and all these other, how it's made for us. We made it, this is our corn, and it's made specifically for us. Paying attention to that as a young person allowed us to continue to talk all the time. Whenever we would get together with certain groups, we'd say, let's talk about white corn and celebrate it. And now now white corn is not only celebrated, it's proliferating. And I see the same. If we can do that with white corn, we can do that with language. We can do that we're doing it with culture. We're doing it with. So as much as the story is about being misunderstood by non-natives, I also don't want to center non-natives' gaze upon us. I want to make sure that that's absolutely accurate. We want to make sure that we're not sitting there ensuring that people who are looking at us, that we're in a constant performance, that we're going to try to be as authentic as who we are, even in our imperfections. We're going to try to be authentic and promote what it means to be on Ongwewe, what it means to be on Ndawaka, what it means from Ohio, or wherever you're from. And that's I think, interestingly enough, areas where we're written out of history are now coming back around, and people are saying, women's suffrage was when I was younger. People are saying, well, where did they get these ideas from? Oh, well, they got them from the Native women that were in and around Seneca and Cayuga Lake. Mm-hmm. And then they said, well, and Pete Jamestown was instrumental along with a bunch of UB professors in exploring the influences of the Haudenosaunee upon Ben Franklin and the founders of the first Articles of Confederation, which is a clear Confederacy model based on the Haudenosaunee and the red-white city-states of the Cherokee, and then the formation of the Constitution, the symbology, the way they talk, the rhetoric, the breaking of the arrows. All of that comes straight from our stories, from our conversations, and I teach classes at St. Bonaventure University, shameless plug here, but in part of my classes, one of the things I argue at the end, and hopefully none of my students are listening now, but I'll give it to them later, is that throughout the entire semester, what I argue is that people in the United States and Canada have become more like Native peoples because there's something about this land, and that's what I think is misunderstood, is there's something about this land, there's something about this space, there's something about how we interact with each other that makes us more like natives than we are like the first colonists that came over. People like to say, well, this is where we came from, but they fail to see how the land, how natives have influenced them tremendously. Mm-hmm. They want freedoms, they want to be more Indian every single day, or indigenous. And I say Indian because it's kind of an imaginary thing. And just like we do. And I think that's a really misunderstood part of our relations. So.
To talk about maybe more positive things.
Sure.
Strengths. And it sounds like, I would say, I have my own personal, listening just right in his last several, 20 minutes.
Are you talking about our loose slot machines?
No, I'm thinking more about, in terms of strengths, strengths, we're still talking about the nation. We're still talking about the people and everything. So, to me, I'm like, you're still here. So, but what would you say are the strengths of the Seneca Nation? Kaycee?
Our resilience. We continue to be here. We continue to pass down our traditions. And even, after Kinzu and everything with displacement, the families found a way to pass certain things down, like the beadwork and everything, that I'm now able to continue to pass that down. Mm-hmm. And I think that's very powerful. I think that's as strong can be. We had such horrific things happen to us, but we're still here and we're continuing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Justin?
Our strengths are, I'll just be blunt and honest like I have to be. Seneca people are beautiful, they're smart, they're amazing, they're creative, they're energetic, they're full of life. They're oftentimes in ways that bewilder those around us. They look at what's happening and immediately have this pity, sympathy effect. And some people kind of play into that, but most of them just shrug it off, tell some jokes, sing, and enjoy each other's company. What are other strengths? I think we have come, with the help of a lot of really smart people in the United States and Canada, to a point where we're essentially starting to be allowed to be those permissions are now being codified, and we're allowed to make our own mistakes. We're allowed to just kind of be human in ways that other people are allowed to as well. And that may sound like some rhetoric, but there was a long period of time where we were put in a nice little box from boarding schools and all this other stuff. Now we've kind of transitioned out of that. We're healing from it. So I think we're looking at our own internal processes. We're looking at our own internal selves and trying to find, really, I'm going to reference a conversation I had last week with a really good friend of mine, Dennis Bowen, who talked about and I look up to him tremendously. He talked about, and he said this before when I've been younger, and I've heard it from other people, but just sometimes it speaks to you. When he says, Nyawe Scanot, a lot of times we say we're thankful that you're well, but Scanot means peace. Scanot, and so what we're really saying is, and he says it more eloquently than I, but he says that we're actually saying, I'm thankful that I can see the peace inside of you, right? I'm thankful that you have some peace, right? And that's the essence of like who we are. So when we run around and we say Nyawe Scanot to each other, we're really talking at a really philosophical level about, hey, I want to see your inner peace. I want to see that you're well in all areas, not just health, not just, I want to see you well all the time. And it's hard to talk about that when there's this like historical baggage and stuff. Because some people, and even like contemporary trauma, it's hard to find the peace inside of you. So if you can kind of conceptualize our greeting philosophies and how that kind of guides us, then I think that's something that's more strong and should help to bind us. And also I might be jaded, but Seneca people are awesome. So I think Kaycee agrees.
I think so. I think so.
Yeah.
So in terms of local, state, or federal policies, what do you think might help overcome some of these challenges you've mentioned? And when I presented this question to you before, I'm like thinking this is a loaded question in a sense, but I think there's got to be some ideas that are out there that just have not come to fruition that you think should be. And Justin, I want to stay with you because I know that you have opinions. So.
Well, I try not to tell. We have the Guswenta, right? The two-row wampum, which essentially means that we have a canoe and it's on a river, and we recognize the vessel, the boat of non-Senecas, and they're to guide their own path, and we're to guide our own. So if you're asking me like philosophically what kind of legislation I'd like to see, I'd like to see that codified in a real relationship with each other. Not just sovereignty talk, not just rhetoric, but actual action that kind of bolsters our relationships through historical interactions. But that's not always gonna put food on people's table or bread in their bellies. I also look at our own government structures. Far too often we get caught up into identity politics. We get caught up into, we have hubris, we have pride just like everybody else. And I'd like to see us move as a people through our own legislative process to really understand who we are, what our real traditions are, and how can we create a better Onondawaka, a better Ohio space, a better Gatageskion space, a space where we're more inclusive of different ideas, and we really work hard on our to get along with each other in spite of our differences, because our differences make us stronger. And we need more voices in the room, and we need the voices of the people that we have marginalized. We need those voices as well. So I look at, and then there's also like the state. So the state often is a boogeyman for indigenous peoples, far too often. And this is something I learned when I was a Kinzu Dam project coordinator, is that the Army Corps of Engineers of back in the day is not the Army Corps of Engineers today. So the Army Corps of Engineers that did the Kinzu Dam construction is not that current entity today. And being in there, I got to see and spend time with people in the Army Corps of Engineers, and they were more inquisitive and curious than a lot of the other people about what actually happened. They didn't want to repeat it. And so I think that there's these entities in New York State that are the exact same way, and far too often we create these barriers that are just, they're false barriers. They don't make sense for our current future. And we can do amazing things together to build our communities. And then talking about the federal government, I'm not talking about specific legislation, right? The federal government, I don't know how you feel. They're kind of in a disarray right now. But I'm actually encouraged by their willing and desire to attempt to try to get things right. And they passed some really good legislation, VAWA, for example. But then there's also the Indian Child Welfare Act, which is amazing piece of legislation from back in the day, actually protected and insulated indigenous youth from being removed from their communities. And now there's an attack on it just because a few people want to be able to enjoy an indigenous person in their home and don't understand the dynamics and the value of indigenous communities with these youth. And if you're not familiar with it, it's very technical. I'd like to see us not be pigeonholed into vice economies anymore. Vice economies, I speak about this extensively. Vice economies are tobacco. You see it right now with the cannabis industry, where there's so many cannabis shops in Allegheny and Cattaraugus, and you see it in our casino gaming. You see it in our gasoline and those are vice economies, and we're pigeonholed into those because we don't really have the ability to mobilize and have access to our homelands in ways that make sense. When I worked in the TIPO office, for the Tribal Historic Preservation Office for the Seneca Nation for a bunch of years, we ended up negotiating an agreement with the Allegheny National Forest for gathering, and I've been instrumental in hunting and fishing and gathering rights on the Seneca Nation for a long time. But that was one of the most powerful things we were able to do is to talk to the head of the Allegheny National Forest and say, these are areas where we gathered since time immemorial, and the idea that we're going to go down there and just strip everything bare doesn't make any sense. We want to have a beautiful relationship and a good process, and how can we do that? We were able to negotiate it out and create a new world where Senecas are able to go down there and gather medicines, gather mast or whatever was available, and things that weren't necessarily located on our small territory in Ohio.
Kaycee, for the same question, what policies, whether a local, state, or federal, do you think might help in overcoming some challenges?
I mean, I think he pretty much covered quite a lot of them. So I think to add to it, I would just say making it, easier for us to get to the polls, to be able to vote. I think it was 2016, we actually saw a huge rise in Native voters. But there are certain things that do make it harder for us to be able to get there. I think also putting more protections, or just protections period, on clean water, because a lot of reservations don't have clean water. Making it so that we don't have pipelines going through some of our land, that would be another one. And that's not just Seneca, that's everybody.
Right.
And I think that, having access to things that everybody else does for these things is a good thing. Even with the requiring IDs for things, that does hinder some of us because not everybody has, a U.S. government ID. We have our own, so there are reservations where that's a thing, and they can't vote, but we live here.
Yeah, we were able to do something pretty amazing on Allegheny territory. I'm glad you got out voting. So when we polled Senecas specifically and why they weren't voting in school board elections, one of the things that they said is they didn't want to register to vote with New York State or with the county or even with the school district, that they were already registered to vote and would only participate in elections that recognize their Seneca citizenship. And so we worked out with the school district to, in partnership and cohort with the Seneca Nation. So the Seneca Nation now sends their clerks down, and we go in to vote, and we go into that area because we register to vote every single year. We register with the Seneca Nation on a yearly basis, physically in person. And there's some exceptions, but for the most part, it's in person. And so our our like registration is pretty robust and it's up to date, much more than say other municipalities. No judgments, just saying that's what we do. And so we're able now to go in and vote in school board elections with our identities intact. I mean, we're able to bring our whole selves into that political space, and I agree with you. Seems like that's kind of been lost in other spaces. We have to conform and say we're this other thing. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but our citizenship was forced upon us with the 1924 U.S. Citizenship Act. So we're one of the very few people in the world that have forced U.S. or forced citizenship. Usually you get citizenship from a couple different ways. You're born into it, you got blood, or you're naturalized.
Right.
Well, there's a fourth way in the United States, and that's called forced citizenship, and they force it on all indigenous peoples. So technically, and I haven't tested it, I'm not going to, but I've always thought, like, am I precluded from, annulling my citizenship? And it sounds like I am, because it takes a congressional act to deny me U.S. citizenship. Congress would have to act and say, we are denying this citizenship to this individual, which is a pretty powerful thing. You're free to go and say, I'm done. I'm going to go join, Bolivia, and
Right.
you're good.
Move to Canada.
Yeah, you can.
Well, yeah, obviously it's not that easy, but just, in terms of just changing.
Yeah, I can, but I wouldn't be able to renounce my citizenship in the same way that you can.
Right.
And I'm not saying I'm
Because they
going.
consider you still, well, you're living in this country, but you're like, but the United States is not your country. It's so to say, really.
Well, that's where it gets sticky.
That's where, yeah.
Because that isn't it? It
Is
kinda
it also, yeah, it is your
Yeah.
country. It's just someone else calls it something.
Yeah.
Well,
it's- It's a shared space.
It's a shared
That's how I try to
space.
say. For the people who are cool, if people want to say that, if they want to deny all the other history that's out there, then I just simply look at them and say, how would you like to reimagine our relationship then? Are you in power over me then? Because if we don't have this as a shared space, if you don't actually agree with that, if you don't actually see it in that capacity, then you are in charge of me, and essentially I am subservient to you in a political way.
Right, like
unless I deny my Indianness, unless I deny my indigenous nature and just accept full-on Americanism, then you are placing me underneath you in a power dynamic that is not. How am I supposed to have a relationship with?
Right, like as an occupied state.
Yeah, as an
Yeah,
occupied
yeah,
state.
yeah.
And that sometimes is hard for people to understand. They're like, well, I don't want to occupy you. It's like, I don't want you to occupy me either. Let's just have this shared space. Can we have it as a shared space? Can we just agree to kind of move in that direction? Yeah. Or am I perpetually occupied? Or am I forced to kind of live in this space where I don't feel welcomed even in my own homelands? And I think that's where land acknowledgement comes from. It's a really powerful tool for kind of acknowledging that.
Yeah. Thinking about resources, because we talk about, well, what would you want to see change, either with laws and things, but sometimes it comes down to resources. Kaycee, you were mentioning about voter registration, and sometimes it's the resources, and then Justin, you mentioned, well, what we did in a sense that the person was a resource, where you had the representative come into the schools, and that through that was the resource to allow people to feel more comfortable as going forward with voting. So
Right.
what would you think would be other resources that might be able to help achieve some of the change you want to see?
I think starting with, our culture, making it so it's not such a cultural desert here in Jamestown. And that's going to mean communicating and saying, hey, we've got these families here, and they need, they deserve these ties to their culture just as much as everybody else, and making it so that we are facilitating an area or a space, for this. And then that way they can come in, they can get the corn, they can get, and corn that's prepared the way we would do it, not just like you can go to Walmart and get a can of corn.
Right.
It's very important for us to be able to hold on to these things. Bringing in our language, even if it's in just small representations where they are seeing it in places. that's incredibly empowering. So starting with very simple things, I think, can actually help build us up, the families that are here, because a lot of us, they don't want to fill out the census and stuff, and within the last 10 years at least, we've had like a 75 drop in numbers. And that could just be because nobody's filling it out, but it could be other reasons as well. And so it is something that we need to think about. Even if there were only 5 of us here, we still deserve it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. If Jamestown is interested, I would just talk about this locally. Jamestown's interested. We developed a lot of really amazing indigenous Seneca language, Onondaga Gaiweno products. Like we struggle with this on our territory as well. So it's not like Jamestown's like alone in this endeavor. Right. But we went and put out stop signs that are in Seneca, site, right? So we now have stop signs in Seneca, and if you're going through there, you're stopping in Seneca. And we put speed limit signs, all these other things that you see every day, and those do have powerful ways of creating connections. This is a multicultural space in Jamestown, and I'm assuming there's tons of other languages and enclaves, and so making sure that they're included as well in the celebration of diversity, that can be a really powerful thing for Jamestown to kind of wrap its head around it. And if the Seneca people can kind of help spearhead that, I would say that's amazing. I would also say, there's something about being at the table of not just like cabinet level stuff, but being there to provide insights, perspectives, understanding, and an idea of a shared space within decision makers' spaces. So I'm not saying they got to go and elect or put these people on there or have them on pedestals. But if you don't have specific people from part of your community that are in the representative space, then you must have them in your guidance space. You must have them in your spaces where the community voices are being heard on a regular basis. You just can't ask them to come to you all the time. You have to invite them, create a sense of belonging, create a space of welcoming. And that takes hard work, but the results and the powerful ways that you're going to connect with your community is going to pay off for creating a more cohesive space. And you're not going to have areas where people are ostracized or felt like they're not being heard. And I don't know how Jamestown does it. I'm assuming that they do have a model that's similar to that. But for indigenous peoples, it's far too often, because we're talking about lower numbers. We're talking about small populations. And often people don't really see indigenous peoples as urban. What the reality is, half of the Seneca people don't live on our territories. They live off territories in our homelands. So they're living in Buffalo, they're living in Jamestown, they're living in Olean, they're living in Rochester, they're living all over the place. So people say, well, where are the natives at? Oh, they're right next to you. They're a few houses down, and maybe you don't even see them because they're not dressed up in regalia, as Kaycee pointed out, or they're not on some kind of cultural display. And but you can find plenty of a really amazing, like I keep saying, Seneca people are amazingly smart and beautiful and amazing. You can find them just about anywhere, and they're in my experience, they're so willing to share, they're so willing to open themselves up and talk openly about their experiences and how they can make a place a little bit better. So that might mean making it a little more indigenous. It might mean making it a little more Seneca, and that's what we're asked to do every day too.
Yeah, I think in our community conversations we had, in the past year with other marginalized and underserved groups, that when we talked last fall with them, the theme of inclusivity is that they want the being included and is and
Belong.
yeah, and how important that is for all different groups. That they say, well, yeah, it's great you can talk about us and all that, but we want to be included in the process of whatever is happening, and be in the room. And it sounds like this is the same.
Yeah.
And that it's important that when you're making big decisions, that everyone who's affected is having that say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like the way you put that. You must have had a really delightful conversation about inclusivity.
So I've been very lucky to talk with a lot of amazing people in the last year.
Yeah.
So this is maybe one of our last questions, but we've talked about how much is misunderstood, and we're sitting here learning about a lot of different things. If people listening or viewing this program want to learn more about the Seneca community or initiatives, so where would you direct them, and what would you recommend? And Kaycee, do you want to start?
I would start with taking the 35-minute drive to the Seneca Nation. There's a wonderful museum there, and I'm sure they would love to have everybody come in and learn a little bit about us. It's very in-depth there. There's a lot of information, so if you guys do go, have a day planned for it, because there is a lot to learn. Just the section about the land leasing, that can take you some time if you actually read everything. So that would be where I would start. Just try to get out there and see. And a lot of people, it's seeing is believing. And maybe if that student would drive out there, he would see that we are still here. We do still exist. And I think that's probably a good start.
Yeah, I like that. So the Inosa Cultural Center is located in Salamanca. It's right across from the casino. The casino also has a lot of really good symbology, and if you're a little bit older, you got to be 21 to go in there. There's nothing like going to the territory. We have powwows in the third week of July in Salamanca, and I would say if people are really interested and they want to know, then there's nothing better than trying to find, where are the indigenous peoples in your community, and then with respect and with honor and with dignity, go and find a way to talk to them in ways that are real and authentic. I'm not saying go beat down their doors, of course, but if you really want to know about indigenous peoples, everybody has their own stuff. If you want to come learn from me, come take my class at St. Bonaventure. Again, another shameless plug. But that's not necessarily going to help you really understand who we are, because I have to be on display. I have to do some curriculum there. But knowing who indigenous people are means getting to become an indigenous ally in their specific space. How do you do that? So, one, you got to do your own homework. There's plenty of websites out there. The Seneca Nation has a website. You can go find it, Seneca Nation of Indians, I think, .org. And if you got a graphic, you can kind of throw that up later. And then you have also the Seneca Iroquois National Museum is located in the Inosa Cultural Center. That one has its own website as well. Okay. And you can throw that up there too. And also there's things like, there's website resources like Food is Our Medicine, which is a really powerful one. It's about, food sovereignty. It's about how do we interact with food, and everyone should be reading this so they get more healthy, understanding from an indigenous perspective. What is food? It's not just McDonald's stuff. It's something that you can kind of enjoy, and I think more people are kind of enjoying that as well. We have a big movements that aren't just indigenous, but if you are into food and you like food, and I think everybody kind of does in order to sustain themselves, it's not going to hurt you to go look up Food is Our Medicine, and it's pretty easy to find. Google search. And then finally, we have some tremendous resources online. One of the resources I look at is called Gyno, and it's with a good friend of mine named Brett Mabey, and he's doing music, and we're working with him to mentor some youth, where he's teaching them how to do podcasts and stuff. So the specific show is on Native Voices. And if you want to know more indigenous stuff, there's no better way to get to know them than through music and understanding all the different music, the contributors to music, from Link Ray to Joanne Shenandoah to amazing traditional singers. Like, he's putting it all out there. He's creating a new market for indigenous music. And I guarantee you, if you like music, if you even listen to any kind of music, you're going to enjoy his kind of show. So you got to do your own homework, find something that interests you, connect it, and do a search. This is what I ask my students. What are you passionate about? Are you passionate about sports? You watching the Bills game right now instead of us? Yeah, you should be. But
I think it's on after our program.
Oh, okay, all
we're
right.
good to go.
All right, we're good.
Yeah.
Go Bills. But so if you're into sports and you're into football, maybe you don't know that one of the greatest athletes of all time is Jim Thorpe, and learn a little bit about him. Learn about the fact that he showed up at a meet for the Olympics and somebody had stole his shoes. Mm-hmm. So he went to the garbage and he pulled out two different size shoes, and he put two different size shoes on, and he still won. And not only did he win, he won in grand style. And he played football for Pop Warner. He is arguably the greatest athlete of all time. And I'm not trying to judge you. I'm just saying, go do the research yourself, and you come to that conclusion. You argue, you say whoever you want to say, and then you put them up against someone like Jim Thorpe, who didn't have all the stuff that we have today, who didn't have all the gym memberships, who didn't have all this stuff. And you see the accomplishments that he was able to do, all the stuff and all the perseverance, all the struggles he had to overcome, and he still performed at arguably one of the highest levels. So if you like sports, you like music, you like, what else can you like? What do you like?
Art.
You like art? Yeah, there's tons of amazing art out there.
And
You're a resident artist. I wanted to ask, are you teaching at Jamestown Community College?
So I will be, eventually, I'll be teaching more formally there, but I will be having workshops, and some of these are going to be just for JCC students, but we are going to be doing a community outreach where it'll be like all-inclusive. And, my main goal is to really try to reach out to, maybe another little Native girl that's like me, who grew up here, that doesn't have these resources, and now she'll be able to learn it. Mm-hmm. Because not too many people really have taken, the time to really pass this down or to learn it. And so some of our culture and our art is going out because of that. And I'm very thankful that my mom did take the time to learn it from my great-grandma and was able to pass it down. Mm-hmm. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to give that to the next generations. We go by the 7 generations, and so I'm hoping that I can keep this going. And we'll have workshops. We want to actually even do like a cultural day, which really will be very involving of the city of Jamestown. And, we'll bring in our dancers and everything for this. We will be, for the students at JCC, we'll be having a mini social where we'll have dancers there. My cousin is going to actually speak the Gunonyok in the beginning and at the end for us. And so I'm very excited for that.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And I received a note from one of our producers that we do carry Brett's podcast on WRFA at 8 a.m. every Saturday. So
absolutely.
So another opportunity for people if you want to hear the music.
Listen in.
8 a.m. on Saturdays here on WRFA. So that's great.
And maybe I'll jump on that show and just give another plug.
That'd be great. That'd be great. We'd love to have you on. Well, I want to thank you both. Thank you so much for being here and telling and sharing with everybody your stories and the history and everything. And I also want to thank our audience as well who have tuned in tonight. You will be able to view this presentation again online for free and on our Facebook page, YouTube channel, and on WRFALP.com. We will be rebroadcasting this on Community Matters as well. On behalf of WRFA, the Reg Lene Center for the Arts team, and Cranky Play Productions, thank you so much for being with us tonight.